Hi, welcome back. Okay, so this is the third lecture, the second on Ruzha or Rushui, focusing on Kǒngzǐ, Confucius. We stopped last time, as you recall, with the Junzi, the gentleman, the ideal, morally ideal person in Rushui. And we noted that this moral ideal, Junzi, manifests Ren, or benevolence, humanness, humaneness, humanity, and that comprises two sub-virtues, Zhong and Shu, which are sometimes translated as loyalty and forgiveness, although Shu is perhaps more appropriately translated as empathy or sympathy or compassion. And empathy seems particularly appropriate, as we noted the construction of the character with heart or mind on the bottom, and compare or to be like the character on top, as noted here. We want to now look at a few cases, a few passages from I'm going to add one more general point in a moment, but we mostly for now want to look at some cases from the Lunyu, the Analects. So let's first go back to ctext.org, Chinese text project, and look at 415, a famous passage in the Analects. The master said, "Shen, my doctrine is that of an all-pervading unity." In other words, there is a single thread that connects all of the elements of my teaching. The disciple Tseng replied, "Yes." The master went out and the other disciples asked, saying, "What do his words mean?" So the idea here is that Kǒngzǐ has told one of his followers that his teachings are unified by a simple, straightforward theme. The disciple says that he understands, and then when Kǒngzǐ is gone, the other disciples ask the one addressed by Kǒngzǐ before, what's going on? What is it that unifies Kǒngzǐ's teachings? And he answers, the master is the doctrine of our master. Sorry, this is there. Well, it's now readable all on one line. Tseng said, "The doctrine of our master is to be true to the principles of our nature and the benevolent exercise of them to others, this and nothing more." This is a kind of elaborate translation that Legge has opted for. Again, I've mentioned before that you can, one of the nice things about this is you can easily, this text project is that you can easily find the Chinese. You're referring, of course, to the last sentence in this section 415. So you can look for the corresponding terms. The sentences are all marked quite clearly. So here you have the last sentence, these 5 characters. And if you look back at the PowerPoint, you'll note that 3 of the some of the characters we might be looking for would be Ren, which is here, Zhong, which is here, and Shu, which is here. And if you look at that last sentence in 415, you don't have to know any Chinese, you just match what you have in the PowerPoint. You see zhong and shu are right there. And indeed, you can infer that what the sentence says is that the doctrine of the master of Kǒngzǐ has basically just two components: follow zhong and follow shu. So again, these are sometimes translated as loyalty and forgiveness. That translation emphasizes the idea that the former is appropriate to your, in a hierarchical structure, to your relation to those above you. I mean, it can have consequences for your relation to your inferiors in the structure, but they principally have consequences for your relation to superiors. So you remain, if you think of the anecdote about the father breaking the law and the son, Kǒngzǐ, saying the son should conceal the fact that the father broke the law, that would be an example of loyalty to the father. Again, you can have it in the other direction too, but it's principally subordinate to superior relation. The opposite, superior to subordinate relation, it would be marked by forgiveness or empathy. It would be marked principally by shu. So forgiveness in the sense that you understand if there are extenuating circumstances why a subordinate may not have been able to fulfill his or her obligations in your behalf. More generally, you have compassion or empathy. You try to put yourself in their position, understand what their experience is. So I think Lege's translation is a little misleading by putting benevolent in here. But on the other hand, benevolent exercise of principles is broadly relevant to the way zhong and shu operate in Kǒngzǐ. So that's a little bit on that passage. So another passage to look at is Book 12, Section 2. So we'll go back to the list of chapters. 12:2. Donggong asked about perfect virtue. The master said, "It is when you go abroad to behave to everyone as if you were receiving a great guest, to employ the people as if you were assisting at a great sacrifice, not to do to others what you would not wish done to yourself, to have no murmuring against you in the country and none in the family," Donggong said. "Though I am deficient in intelligence and vigor, I will make, and none in the family, period." Donggong said, in response to what Kǒngzǐ has said, Donggong said, "Though I am deficient in intelligence and vigor, I will make it my business to practice this lesson." So what I want to draw out of this, several things. When you go abroad, to behave to everyone as if you were receiving a great guest. So this is a clear expression of benevolence in an ordinary sense of benevolence. In the ordinary sense of Ren, again, benevolence is the way it's usually translated, and very appropriately for this sort of thing. So one of the things that Kǒngzǐ continually emphasizes is that you should be evaluating yourself and not others. One passage we may or may not look at, he says that archery has great lessons for the way we live our lives, because if you're practicing archery and you don't hit the target, you don't hit the bullseye, you ask, what have you done wrong? And he holds that up as a sort of model for the way you should behave generally, the way you should be thinking generally. You shouldn't be thinking about what others have, or shouldn't be focusing on what others have done wrong, but what you have done wrong. A sort of positive version of that is when you go abroad, when you're a guest of someone else, you should behave toward them as if they were the guest and they were an exalted guest that you were honored to receive. So rather than concentrating on what you merit, what treatment you deserve, what accommodations you should receive from the other person as host, you should be thinking of yourself as host and behaving benevolently toward them. To employ the people as if you were assisting at a great sacrifice. So that would entail a number of things. It would entail treating them with respect. You don't treat participants in a ritual with disrespect. Those of you who who are religious or have a religious background know that proper attitude, a proper respectfulness toward other participants in a church service, a baptism, a confirmation, any other sort of church, a mass, anything like that. You don't treat people with disrespect. You treat people honorably, and you treat them formally. It's also not a great informal fun fest. So employing the people in this way is not to say that you're always employing them in rituals. You, of course, aren't. He's addressing here a relatively limited elite who would be often in governmental positions, in charge of, for example, when people would be recruited to do socially necessary labor for the government, for example. But even when you're requiring, work on roads, or you're requiring payment of taxes, or whatever it is you're requiring, you should have in mind the norm, the standard of treating people as if this were not just manual labor, or not just a monetary exchange that you were requiring of them, but was an elevated, a spiritually elevated, a ritually elevated interaction for which you would need to treat them in an appropriate way. So you don't behave with disdain toward ordinary people. You always behave politely, properly, respectfully. And then we have the famous Confucian Rushui version of the Golden Rule: not to do to others as you would not wish done to yourself. So the idea here is, the Golden Rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This version is do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. there is a slight difference in the orientation, but it's basically the same idea. It's an emphasis on shu, empathy. Elsewhere in the Lun Yu, it's phrased as using yourself as a model to understand others. So you wouldn't want to be treated in a certain way, disrespectfully, for example. You don't want to be imposed on by unwelcome guests. You don't want to be demeaned when being required to do work, and so don't do that to other people. And indeed, the passage refers directly, this section refers directly to shu. Here you can see the character again. Here and here with this repeated phrase. It's a different phrase than the one we're looking at, but it's important that shu turns up in this longer passage, because it leads us to keep that in mind in interpreting this version of the Golden Rule. I almost forgot to mention the idea of perfect virtue. You may wonder, what does perfect virtue mean? Well, perfect virtue, you want to look, that obviously turns up in the first sentence. You want to look at the first sentence of the Chinese, and what do you find there? You find this character, which you ought to recognize, and if you don't, you can double click on it, look it up. Compassion, adjective, but noun, benevolence. It's as you can see, ren. Legge translates it. This is the translator that they've drawn on for the Chinese text, much of the Chinese text project, at least the Lun Yu. So he translates ren as perfect virtue. But this is an explication by Kǒngzǐ of what the perfect virtue, the ideal character of the Junzi is. And indeed, if you look at other parts of this chapter, you see Ya Yuan asked about perfect virtue. It's again ren. Zhong Gong asked about perfect virtue that we've talked about. Si Man Yu asked about the superior man. And the superior man here in case you didn't recognize it, is Junzi, the gentleman, the ideal. Okay. So I wanted to look at 15.24 also. So we'll go back to the Analects in 15 and 24. Zigong asked, is there one word which may serve as a rule of practice for all one's life? The master said, is not reciprocity such a word? What you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. And what Legge translates as reciprocity is again shu. You can see that here. And reciprocity makes sense. Empathy is the sort of emotion of what may manifest itself, or what can be seen represented in interaction as a reciprocity. So that's a perfectly plausible way of interpreting it. I would stick with empathy just so that the reader of the English would know it's the same word, shu, as you're getting elsewhere. But I understand why Legge chose reciprocity. So in this passage, Kǒngzǐ actually elevates shu, empathy, above zhōng in relation to the junzi, and makes it basically definitive of benevolence. So it becomes the sort of primary specific virtue defining that should guide one's whole life, that in effect marks out the tiandao, the way of heaven, that the junzi should follow. And then we get the repetition of the Confucian version of the Golden Rule: what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others, which we've already discussed. Okay. As you may have gathered from some of the passages we just went through and explicated, one point of emphasis in Rushui tradition is Li. Well, you wouldn't have known it was Li, the Chinese, but what's sometimes referred to as ritual propriety, or you could call it sort of manners. It's a kind of proper behavior that is decorous, that is respectful, that is the kind of behavior that you find in ritual settings. So the way I think about it, I don't know that this would be the way that everyone would think. I'm sure it isn't the way that everyone would think about it, but the way that I think about it is in keeping with the passage that we just read a moment ago, from chapter 12, that in effect you should behave with the respect and the concern that you would have for other people in a great sacrifice, an important religious event. And that should be a sort of general model for your interaction with people. And that is following Li. And when Legge translated zhōng as being true to your principles and shu as how did he translate it? That was 415. Let's quickly look back at 415. Benevolent exercise of them to others. Be true to the principles of our nature and benevolent exercise of them to others. That translation of zhōng as being true to the principles of our nature, in effect connects the idea of zhōng, loyalty, respectful adherence, or respectful attitude. Again, primarily to superiors, but it can also apply to subordinates, but primarily to superiors. Translating it that way with reference to principles of our nature incorporates the idea stressed elsewhere in the Lunyu and other Rushui texts of the ritual propriety or manners. Another use of the word li refers to principles also. You remember that from the metaphysics. So that there's sometimes a sort of wordplay on these two uses of li. Okay, so I want to look at a few more passages from the Lunyu. Because of time, I may not do the opening of the Lunyu. Maybe I'll look at 2-3 first. Because I want to get on to some other Confucian texts today. So 2-3. The master said, if the people be led... Oh, yes. Yeah. I didn't remember which one this was. If the people be led by laws and uniformity sought to be given by punishments, they will try to avoid the punishment but have no sense of shame. If they be led by virtue and uniformly sought to be... and uniformity sought to be given them by the rules of propriety, they will have a sense of shame and moreover will become good. I'm doing this a little out of order, but this is a crucial passage in the Lunyu, and I wanted to be sure to get to it. The first thing I want to note about this passage is that, well, let me back up for a minute. Dating of these early texts is really very impossible. I mean, we can give, scholars can give a general time period when the full text appeared, but any specific point, any specific passage, it's very difficult it's impossible to isolate an origin, a specific date of origin. And so my personal suspicion, which I think is pretty well grounded, just sort of on the way that philosophical debates in human society operate, is that there were different schools of thought that eventually developed into Rushui and Taoism and other tendencies, and that they interacted, they influenced one another and critiqued one another, and so that you get allusions or references of one to the other in various passages, even though it may seem that this is impossible because of the dating of the texts in question. But again, I don't think that is the case. I don't think it's impossible because of the dating of the texts in question. So, for example, it seems to me that there are clearly passages in the Tao Te Ching, the foundational Taoist text, that allude to passages that have ended up in the Lunyu, the Analects, and criticize the Rushui, Kǒngzǐ's position. Conversely, it seems to me less often the case, far less often the case, but it does seem to me to happen that the Lunyu, the Analects, have passages that suggest positions that later reflected, later concerned or were addressed by Taoists or by legalists, even though legalism as an official philosophy certainly post-dated the Lenu, the Analects. So I mentioned that the foundational text of Taoism is the Tao Te Ching. Jing again is classic, the classic of Tao, the way, and De, and virtue. And it's interesting that this passage that is translated, the part that is translated as led by, is actually Tao. If the people are led along the path of laws, and uniformity is, and conformity perhaps, is sought, and if a government tries to send people along the path of laws, but along the right path by laws, keeping them on the path by punishment, they will avoid the punishment but have no sense of shame. So the word there is Tao. Now, Tao is again, the way is again an idea that is common to various schools, but the emphasis on the way not being the way of laws clearly fits what later develops into legalism, because in legalism, the way, the Tao, is the Tao of laws, and that's all there is to it. And this is this passage is clearly criticizing people who think that. So clearly, people thought that in China at the time Kǒngzǐ said this, or it was handed down at least as a saying of Kǒngzǐ's, even though legalism as an official doctrine had not yet been formulated. So the idea of the first part is that if you try to get people to follow the Tao, the right path, the Tian Tao, the path of heaven, the path set out by the normative principles of the universe, the way to do that is definitely not by ordering them to do it and punishing them if they don't, because they won't be going on the path then. They'll just be, they won't have any moral sense of the Tao. They will only be following rules to which they have no inner commitment. And indeed, the implication is that they would violate the rules, or might violate the rules, at any opportunity, at any time, when they were no longer risking punishment, because there's no internalization, there's no harmony with the rules. So in Rushui terms, in terms of Kǒngzǐ's teaching, there's no development. They're not junzi. They're not gentlemen. They're not. They haven't developed ren, benevolence. They haven't cultivated shu, empathy, or zhong, loyalty. Nothing. All of which would form a sense of shame, a sense of how one should behave properly. If they be led by virtue, so if the Tao they follow is the Tao of De, of virtue, and you can find that virtue is De again by looking at the Chinese and double clicking and so on, as I showed you before. This is one of the reasons why I think there's a kind of association with Tao Te Ching, even though it's hard to say if the latter text existed at this time or not, because it's the Tao of De. If Kǒngzǐ isn't alluding to what became Taoism, then it's possible that the Taoist, the adoption of that particular title for this foundational text of Taoism it's possible that alludes to the Rushui idea. In fact, I suspect that's more likely because the text in question, the Taoist text in question, was early on referred to as the Lao Tzu, the same name as the same way in which the Mengzi, teachings attributed to Mengzi are just referred to as the Mengzi, and similarly those attributed to Lao Tzu are just called the Lao Tzu. So Tao Te Ching is an addition to that, is a change from it being referred to as the Lao Tzu. So that title at least might allude to this general idea in Rushui and Kǒngzǐ's teachings. In any case, the key part of this, the key message of this second sentence in this passage is central to the social and moral orientation of Rushui, of Kǒngzǐ's teachings, Confucianism again, is that you don't rely on law principally. What you rely on is establishing a path of virtue. So in other words, what you want is you want the people following the Tao because they've internalized the principles of right behavior, because they feel benevolence, which means that they are empathic and loyal. And you do this by example, by showing them the way to behave, not principally by punishing them if they don't follow the right path. This doesn't mean that punishment is completely left out of Kǒngzǐ's polity. Sometimes punishment may be required in order to preserve normalcy, peacefulness of social order, social relations, and so on. But it is never a good way of getting people to follow the Tian Dao, the path of heaven. So if you can get them to follow the path, the Tao, by showing them your virtue, by serving as an exemplar for De, for virtue, and by teaching them to behave properly, that is with ritual propriety and also with Ren, or benevolence, then they will have the proper moral and emotional attitude and will not just mechanically follow the way, but will that they will be following through their own nature in doing that. This passage is extremely important for the difference from legalism and also for the development of the different schools of Rushui thought, of Confucian thought, represented by Mengzi and Shunzi, that we will get to in the next class. Okay, so I wanted to spend some time on that. what I might do is I might return to, let me quickly look at one, at chapter 1. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll look at 9 just very briefly. 1:9. The philosopher Zheng said, "Let there be careful attention to perform the funeral rites to parents, and let them be followed with, when long gone, with the ceremonies of sacrifice. Then the virtue of the people will resume its proper excellence." I just want to note this. The various passages that I mentioned in the PowerPoint are all worth looking at, but I just want to emphasize this one because I just want to note this one because I've been emphasizing the role of ritual as a kind of model for everyday interaction. But the Lunyu also, and indeed before seeing, also emphasizes the performance of genuine rituals. Kǒngzǐ emphasized the importance, in his view, the great importance of actually doing the traditional rituals in the traditional way, and particularly the rituals for one's parents that show the filial piety, the shao, that is such a central concern, such a definitive concern for Rushui. So this is an example of that. And that one of the things that's crucial is for people in a superior position to always strictly follow the proper traditions and to fulfill their obligations, because, and this in a general way certainly makes sense, because when ordinary people look to the people who are in charge of society, the people who have power in society, the people who are demanding, the elite, the rulers who are demanding that ordinary people follow various routines and practices. When the ordinary people look at that elite, if they see them not following the principles, not performing the rituals, not behaving with shao, filial piety, and so on, not doing any of this themselves, the ordinary people are not going to have much faith either in their superiors, their government, the bureaucracy, or the emperor, well, the ruler, whether an emperor or not. And they're likely to have little faith in the rituals, the practices, the traditions themselves. So this is likely to be that failure to adhere to ritual propriety is likely to have serve as a harmful example for ordinary people. And of course, it's likely to corrupt, for Kǒngzǐ, it's likely to corrupt the bureaucracy, the rulers, this elite stratum also. Let me just quickly look at 16 to see if it's something that we should. Oh, yeah. 1:16, the master said, "I will not be afflicted at men's not knowing me. I will be afflicted that I do not know men." That's usually translated as recognize, acknowledge, respect, something like that. Know is a little, I mean, maybe it's literally fine, but it doesn't really, I think, convey the point. The point here is just you should engage in self-criticism rather than criticism of others. That point that I noted earlier. So if you go somewhere and somebody doesn't recognize you, doesn't acknowledge you, doesn't respond well to you, that shouldn't concern you. But if you go somewhere and you should have acknowledged, recognized, respected someone and don't, that's something that should concern you. That's another sort of fundamental point in Kǒngzǐ's teachings. Okay, so let's go on a little bit, if we can get this thing to move. Okay. I mentioned the importance of rituals, of actually practicing the rituals. In this respect, Kǒngzǐ takes up the devotion to ancestry that I've already mentioned is a long-standing part of Chinese tradition. Of course, Kǒngzǐ himself was teaching 2,500 years ago, but the devotion to ancestors predated Kǒngzǐ by many centuries. So it's very long-standing in Chinese tradition. It involved remembrance and sacrifice, ritual practices relating to the founder of one's lineage, 4 generations of one's immediate precursors, and some special figures in the history of one's lineage. It's a very elaborate and, so to speak, de-egocentrizing, you might say, practice, a way of taking attention away from a narrow focus on yourself in the present, and extending the scope of your sense of the world by developing this sense of reverence or shao, this piety, dutifulness toward this series of ancestors, and hence the importance of rituals. I'm going to skip that. Rites or rituals that he emphasized, of course, refer to formal ceremonies, but they also refer to a whole series of other things. This is why I said it trivializes them to call them manners. But there's the extent of what we would refer to as manners or having good manners is more like the extent of rites or rituals in Ru Shui. So that it involves such things as how you greet other people, who speaks first, who is allowed to speak when, what physical distance you keep from other people, how you behave toward them. Greetings involve such things as I say, whether you bow or how low you bow or whatever. It's not just, what words you use. So it's a whole series of behavioral practices designed to show due respect for people. Again, this is in a hierarchical context, and it does tend to honor the hierarchy. And indeed, many figures in the history of China have criticized Ru Shui for supporting this hierarchization, this stratification, even though within the teachings themselves that hierarchization is not absolute. It's or isn't unidirectional, I should say. It isn't only a matter of what in the Chinese terms, Shaoren owe to Daren, a leader referred to as big people, and the ordinary folk are referred to as small people. Shaoren. It's a different Shao than the Shao in filial piety. So it isn't only a matter of what Shaoren owe to Daren. It's the Daren, the big people, owe empathy and forgiveness to Shaoren also. So as we've emphasized. But on the side of the critics, one has to admit that it is probably, indeed it is certainly the case that Ru Shui has at times been used historically to stress the subordination of the little people rather than the obligations of the big people. That certainly happened. There's a commonplace that you'll read about Ru Shui and rites or rituals that Ru Shui only demands external conformity. It doesn't demand internal adherence to principles. The more you learn about Ru Shui and Kǒngzǐ's teachings, the bizarrer that becomes. It's just totally wrong. I mean, now it may be in fact in practice that rulers only cared about external conformity. They didn't really care what you were thinking. That is quite possible. I don't know. It was probably true in a wide range of societies that they were more concerned about external conformity than internal feelings. But Kǒngzǐ emphasized internal feelings, as we saw in that passage about the difference between leading people on the Tao by virtue versus leading them on the Tao by law. It's very clear there. It's also clear in the discussion of mourning of one's dead parents from the Book of Rites, the Book of Ceremonies. It emphasizes thinking about your parents, reflecting on them, trying to think about in your future what would they have wanted you to do, and try to, even though they're not there, trying to do things that would make them proud, etc. It's all very internal. They talk about jing, or reverence for parents, for example, a whole process of after their deaths, carefully imagining. It's set out in detail, carefully imagining their appearance, their voice, what they wanted in life, what they desired, what they were able to accomplish, what they didn't succeed in accomplishing. It's very detailed and internal and psychological. And for this reason, intention, or shin, and again, that character it's one of the characters that is worth learning. Again, shin is translated as heart or mind, depending on whether you're emphasizing the seat of emotion or the seat of cognition. The two are joined in Chinese tradition rather than being segregated from one another, as in our distinction between heart and mind. But in any case, shin is crucial. You remember again, shin is the lower half of the character for shu, empathy, the upper half being the character for be like, to be similar to, or to compare. Okay. Two key texts that I want to spend a little time looking at some passages in are texts from, are chapters from the Classic of Rites. These are The Da Shui I mentioned before, the great learning or the greater learning. Again, Da is just big. Shui is learning or teaching or study. To get to this in the ctext.org, you need to know that the name of the classic is Liji. So I have it, where's my cursor there? I have it right here. We'll look at that in a second. The doctrine of the mean is the Zhongyong. Again, I want to look at some passages from each of these because these are very important additions to or supplements to the Lun Yu. Okay, excuse me. So, as I mentioned before, at ctext, you go to Confucianism, then you go to Liji, and then you scroll down to, you have to find Da Shui and Zhonggong. They're here somewhere. Zhongyong, excuse me. There's Zhongyong, but I wanted Da Shui first. There's Da Shui. Okay, so the first passage that I want to look at is Da Shui 2. The Da Shui is a really, despite the word Da, big in the title, is actually really small. It's a very short work. I want to look at the second one. The ancients who wished to illustrate illustrious virtue, throughout the kingdom, first ordered well their own states. Wishing to order well their states, they first regulated their families. Wishing to regulate their families, they first cultivated their persons. Wishing to cultivate their persons, they first rectified their hearts. Wishing to rectify their hearts, they first sought to be sincere in their thoughts. Wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended to the utmost their knowledge. Such extension of knowledge lay in the investigation of things. Things being investigated, knowledge became complete. The knowledge being complete, their thoughts were sincere. Their thoughts being sincere, their hearts were then rectified. Their hearts being rectified, their persons were cultivated. Their persons being cultivated, their families were regulated. Their families being regulated, their states were rightly governed. Their states being rightly governed, the whole kingdom was made tranquil and happy. From the Son of Heaven, Son of Heaven is the name given to the honorific title by which one referred respectfully to the emperor. From the Son of Heaven down to the king, the primary ruler. From the Son of Heaven down to the mass of the people, all must consider the cultivation of the person the root of everything besides. It cannot be when the root is neglected that what should spring from it will be well ordered. It never has been the case that what was of great importance has been slightly cared for, and at the same time that what was of slight importance has been greatly cared for. Okay, so this is the kind of passage you get over and over again. It has a rhetorical form that is recurrent in Chinese philosophical tradition. In order to do F, you have to do E. In order to accomplish E, you have to do D. In order to succeed in D, you have to have finished C. In order to have finished C, you have to have realized B. In order to have realized B, you have to have begun with A. Having begun with A, you can realize B, and so on. This is, you'll find, if you read much early Chinese philosophy, you'll find this pattern again and again. What you also find in Ru Shui, in Kǒngzǐ's teachings, is that the determinative element is always the smallest and most basic unit. So you don't start out trying to order the whole kingdom. If you're emphasizing law, you probably do start out with the whole kingdom. If you're saying that in order to get people to behave rightly and think rightly, you have to have a legal system that will force them to do that, you're starting out with the big picture, the big structure, and indicating that what follows from the big structure, that everything else follows from the big structure. That is the opposite of what you usually find in Kǒngzǐ's teachings. For Kǒngzǐ, you start with whatever is smallest and build up from there. So if you want the whole kingdom to be virtuous, well, the first thing you have to do is make sure that the individual states or the social components of the larger kingdom are well ordered or in line or following basically in all of these cases it's following the Tao. But if you want the states to be well ordered, you have to begin with families. Families have to be behaving properly. So if you don't have Shao in the family, for example, if you don't have children respecting their parents and parents empathizing with their children, if you don't have parents and children being loyal to one another, if that doesn't occur in the family, then you're never going to get loyalty and empathy on the larger scale of the society as a whole. So it's necessary to begin with the family, to cultivate Shao, Shu, Zhong in the family. Okay, but how do you do that? Well, you can't expect to get your family to behave properly and to have the proper respect and the proper feelings and the proper empathy and so on if you yourself are morally and emotionally disordered. So prior to trying to get your family thinking, behaving, and feeling properly, you have to take care of yourself. So suppose I'm the head of a family. I want the family to behave properly, to have the right feelings, but I don't bother with the sacrifices to my ancestors. I don't practice the rememoration of my parents. I don't think about them. I don't remember their face and their voice. I don't reflect on what they would have wanted for me. I don't try to behave in a respectful way to them when they're alive or after they've died. Then I can't expect my children to behave properly toward me. So I first have to change my own behavior and attitudes, or make sure my own behavior and attitudes are right. Okay, but how do I do that? So, wishing to regulate their families, they first cultivate their persons. That's what I was referring to a moment ago. Wishing to cultivate their persons, how do I get myself to behave and feel the right things, to do and feel the right things? They first rectify their hearts, and heart there is Shin. Where's my cursor? is Shin, that heart mind. So rectifying your heart means that you think about things properly and you feel properly. So, for example, if I am not behaving properly toward my parents, one of the things I want to do is engage in those rememoration exercises that are part of the classic of ritual, of rites that I talked about a few moments ago. The rememoration exercise in which I imagine their faces, their voices, and so on. This will orient my Shin cognitively and affectively, intellectually and emotionally toward them. Okay, so now first they rectified their hearts. Oh, okay, well, I sort of skipped something. So I have to have the right attitude and right thoughts about, say, my parents, to take a specific example. So how do I do that? I first seek to make my thoughts and feelings sincere. And that sincerity that I strive for in relation to my parents is the sort of thing that is cultivated in the rememoration exercises. Sincerity means I recognize what my actual feelings are, and I'm not hypocritical or self-deceptive, self-deluded. I don't act in bad faith. I know the way I feel, and I recognize and understand the way I feel, and am honest about it. And because without that honesty about the way I feel and think, I can't possibly rectify my attitudes, my behavior, my feelings, and so on. They will be out of kilter. They will be improperly oriented. And again, if they're improperly oriented, then I won't follow the rituals. If I don't follow the rituals, or I won't behave with Zheng and Shu, I won't behave with Ren or benevolence. I will be not be exemplary. And if I'm not exemplary, I can't expect the members of my family to behave and properly and have the right attitudes, and so on, up to the whole kingdom. So how do I become sincere in my thoughts? They first, wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended to the utmost their knowledge. I'm going to just continue. Such extension of knowledge lay in the investigation of things. Things being investigated, knowledge becomes complete. The knowledge complete, their thoughts were sincere, and so on. This is a little abstract, but what I take it to mean is that when I want to render my thoughts and feelings sincere, I have to actually engage in the exercise of coming to understand what I think, what my attitudes are, and what they should be. And again, I do this by such things as the rememoration exercise. And I don't want to overemphasize the exercise of remembering one's parents, concretely imagining one's father's or mother's voice and face and so on. I don't want to overemphasize that, because I don't want to give the impression that that's all there is. Rememoration exercises are all there is to it. No, not at all. There are many things you do. For example, in keeping with what we saw from the beginning of the Lunyu, you consider, one of the things you investigate is the degree to which you've been concerned about other people recognizing you, but you haven't paid attention to whether you recognized other people. investigating things involves such matters as using archery as an analogy. If something goes wrong, you should look to see what you did that caused it wrong. So it should be, you should not be focusing on what other people have owed to you and should be giving you and so on, but on what you've done wrong, how you've failed. That's the investigation of things that is important here. I've just been using rememoration exercises as an example, but there are a whole range of such processes. And you go through these processes in order to understand yourself and yourself in relation to the norms of Rushui, of Confucian thought, of the tradition of the classics. And this is the way that you achieve that sincerity. And once you've achieved that sincerity, then you can follow through the practices that lead you to rectify your person, to lead you to have the right attitudes, have the right knowledge, knowledge of ritual, knowledge, respect for parents, and empathy for all others. Again, part of the investigation of things is deeply considering and systematically considering, have I done to other people things that I wouldn't want them to do to me? So you engage in that thought, and that will rectify you as a person. Once you're rectified as a person, you will behave properly. When you behave properly, you'll serve as an exemplar for your family, and the family will then begin to rectify its behavior. And this will have consequences that extend across families, eventually leading to the right development of the whole society. This is a standard and central view, a key view in Rushui, in Kǒngzǐ's teachings. Let's see. There are states being... he, of course, emphasizes that this is particularly the case for the ruler, for the Son of Heaven, the Emperor, the King, the monarch, who stands as an exemplar for everyone. This is particularly the case for the Son of Heaven, and indeed that exemplary position of the Son of Heaven is what gives rise to the possibility that exemplary position of the Son of Heaven is underwritten by the Tianming, the mandate of heaven, and the possibility of failing and the dire consequences of failing in that role are what give rise to the loss of the Tianming, the loss of the mandate of heaven. And indeed, that's a point that we'll see developed in Kǒngzǐ. Okay, so I'm out of time, and I've gone over a couple of classes, so I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more that we could look at in the Dashui and the Zhongyong, which we didn't get to at all, though the Zhongyong has similar, it's again in the same tradition. So we'll begin with Kǒngzǐ at the next class. So thank you.